All right, good morning, folks. How are we all doing? I'm gonna keep looking around the pillar here, and for those of you on Zoom, there's just a big pillar in the middle of the room. Good morning, all. So I'm very happy to see you all here today, and those of you online, welcome. This is the UC Disaster Resilience Network's, easy for me to say, UCDRN for short, first, but not the last, Resilience Day. So let's just give it a hand for that we've gotten everybody here for this system-wide gathering. Yeah? So my name's Geoff Green. I have the privilege of being your MC and moderator for the morning portion. My affiliation with this work is that I have the privilege of serving as co-chair of the Campus Space Committee in Santa Barbara, and I see some of my colleagues from there. And by day, I'm the CEO of the foundation with our community college, which has served over the years as a resource in many disaster recovery efforts in our region as well. But really what I want to thank you for most of all today is being here, whether you're in person or online. This really does take everybody. I was really pleased to see upon walking in that we had over 300 registrants for this effort, this first time effort. So give yourselves a hand for that. That was big. I mean, you don't have to take my cues when I ask you to clap. You can clap at whatever you want. Or nothing at all, I suppose. I want to give, or randomly like that, that's perfect. I want to thank a few key folks here that helped us get here today. First, Nico Pascal, who's been a visionary behind this effort now for many years, who I actually probably first met. Let's give Nico a big hand. Dr. Joe Lightman, who serves as executive director of the effort now on a statewide basis, system-wide basis. Our DRN fellows, Sonnet and Jack, are here, I believe. We've never met, but I think they're here somewhere. They're on their way from the airport, all right? This is, okay. So big hand for Sonnet and Jack. And Joe Rowland. These are some of the folks that have really made sure that this all works. And this is a big effort. And this is a big effort for a number of reasons. First of all, the University of California is of course, a massive powerhouse, world-renowned research institution, university education system, and more and increasingly a community partner. And that's what we're about here today, is to try to figure out how to fit all these pieces together system-wide for the University of California. So our goal today is several-fold. We want to look at our state with respect to disaster preparedness, resilience, recovery. What are we doing? What are we doing well? What are we doing not as well? What are we learning along the way? And for better or for worse, we have a lot of opportunities to learn, and that is now every day, essentially, for all of us. We want to showcase the ways in which we can do system-wide work within the University of California. What are the ways that we can coordinate among the campuses? What are the ways that we can connect those campuses within their communities to do important work and to offer what the UC can uniquely do, but also connect in real ways with the grassroots folks in the various communities around the state. And we want to do this system-wide. And of course, today we want to explore some of the tougher questions about how we are or are not ready, what we can or cannot do as we prepare for, live through, and then respond to disasters of different kinds. And they occur, and like I said, we have a learning opportunity every day. We really can't go much further today without at least acknowledging 3 underway right now. And they're 3 disasters of very different types, and yet we are seeing these more and more regularly at the moment. We have the earthquake in Afghanistan and a massive recovery effort there. We have the war in Israel and Gaza underway at this very moment. And of course, we have some of the research out of the university itself showing these warming ocean temperatures, which are setting records now all over the Pacific. So we're looking at a wide range of disasters, things that our species and of course all other species on the planet are needing to adapt to. We really don't have a choice. I was going to say this morning, this is not my field. I'm not primarily in the disaster recovery field, but as a friend of mine reminded me, we're all in that field. It doesn't matter if you signed up for it or not, by being human on the planet at this moment, we're in the field. So that is what we're here to explore. This morning we have 4 keynote addresses. I know usually you hear keynote and you think long speech. No, that's not what we're doing. We have 4 folks that are really gonna frame the day for us, and that's the idea this morning. If you were expecting 5, I am unfortunately the one who has to tell you that Professor Jan Napolitano will not be with us this morning. She fell ill and was unable to be here. We have actually a video we may be able to show later with some comments from her, but unfortunately she will not be with us live today. But we do have 4 folks that are going to frame a whole wide range of, bring their experiences here and talk a little bit about how they see this work. So let me ask before I introduce our keynotes, I'm curious who's in the room. How many of you are working as faculty within the UC system somewhere? Yeah, all right. All right, give these folks, we're just gonna clap for everybody at this point. I'm gonna try to get everybody on top. All right, students within the, all right, there's a few right there, all right. All right, Son and Jack are in the room, right? All right, our fellows, great, welcome. How many of you are in community-based work, community-based organizations? I see Abe, okay, thank you. Right, give them a hand too, all three of us. What about governmental agencies of various types, at any level, really? Okay, wonderful. Thank you for all being here. Give yourselves a hand. All right. So, private sector. Joe just whispered, private sector. Don't forget the private sector, folks. All right. Thank you.
International agencies?
Okay, I would, you could, yes. Let's just say international agencies. Anyone else want to just offer a categorization of your field? Okay. Just randomly wandered into this room. That would be fun too. Okay, so we're going to start off with Chief Sujit Mohanty. He is the Chief of the United Nations Office for Disaster Reduction in the Arab States Office in Cairo, Egypt, where he's been since 2017. He has over 20 years of experience in the field of disaster risk management, humanitarian coordination, development, climate change. He worked with UN organizations such as the Office for Humanitarian Coordination and the United Nations Development Program, and actually led the Asia Ministerial Conference's regional coordination for the implementation of the Sendai framework in the entire Asia region. So he's got a tremendous amount of experience, and he's going to kick us off today here at the microphone. So please welcome him. And he was waiting for that cue where I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop introducing you now. So welcome, Sujit.
Thank you very much, Geoff. And really good morning, colleagues. It's really wonderful to be here. This is the first time I'm coming to this UCDRN meeting. I think it's really a great privilege for me to understand how you function, but at the same time, I think I have something to offer. With that great introduction, I think I'll not go into any introduction. I joined in the UN back in year 2000, just after a super cyclone in the state of Odisha. The state of Odisha in India, which is a coastal state, and it was the cyclone, which was in 1999, was called a super cyclone. And why it was called a super cyclone? Because of course its intensity, but because also of its devastation, the level of, I think, the impact received by the community in Odisha was really mind-blowing. 14,000 people died in that disaster. That's one event. And when I joined, I see that everybody was into response, recovery, rehabilitation, which was really needed at that time. And when I reflect back, I think it was the whole notion of a disaster was always everybody said to me, oh, these are natural disasters, we cannot prevent them. These are act of God, some people say. And we used to say in UNDRR, we always has been promoting that there is nothing called natural disaster. A cyclone, earthquake, or a flood are natural phenomena or natural hazards. It only becomes a disaster when there was something lacking or something wrong happened before, which essentially could be due to wrong planning, putting a settlement in the floodplain, or putting the settlement in an unsafe area. And that decision is, someone, a human being, at some point has taken. I would not say it was always deliberately taken, intentionally taken. It's sometimes lack of information, lack of the risk knowledge, lack of knowing what area is unsafe. Having said that, when I look at now the same state, I always used to go back to the same state because I started my career there and I wanted to see how we are progressing. Are we progressing at all in reducing risk or not? And in 2019, there was a similar cyclone hit the same state with the same intensity, and there were only 89 people or 86 people died. This does show there was enormous effort went into saving lives, and I think that's really something to be celebrated. But at the same time, when we looked at the impact of the same intensity of another cyclone in the same place, we found that economic losses has been doubled, whereas development was not really doubled in that particular place. The losses in 1999 were something around, I think, 4.1 billion, which in 2019 it became 8.9 billion US dollar. And when we say losses, it's not just financial losses. It's the losses of people's livelihood, people becoming poorer and poorer, so they're pushed into poverty. So these effects were almost doubled in that space. And when we look at globally, the same trend we can see that in terms of saving lives, there's a lot of effort has gone. I think countries have really kind of ramped up their response effort. They can now evacuate in time. So there is, when it comes to saving lives, there is a good progress. But when it comes to, again, looking at the economic losses, it's still going through roof. The global figure from 2000 to 2019, there were 7,348 major disasters, which claimed almost 1.23 million people's lives, affecting 4.2 billion population, and a global economic loss of approximately 2.97 trillion US dollar. Now, when we talk about economic losses, again, this is not the financial losses. It is about the human suffering. It's also about indirect losses, which is unfortunately not counted in this 2.97 trillion. It's very hard to calculate or to really look at these losses in monetary figure. But what is evident that this is decades or sometimes centuries of development gains which is destroyed in these disasters, which essentially also means that those people who are affected by these disasters are pushed into poverty. So poverty and inequality is growing, and this is what I think is also sort of creating more vulnerability and more risk. So it's a vicious cycle that if you have more poverty, people are more vulnerable to disasters. They cannot withstand even a simple shock. And at the same time, more number of disasters are resulting in more number of people being pushed into poverty. And this is what exactly is this year's International Day for Disaster Reduction's theme, which is fighting inequality for resilience. I come from UNDRR, United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which deals with all governments globally to make their strategies and plans and implement them effectively to reduce their risk. And what we do with the countries through a framework called Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which was adopted by 186 member states back in 2015 in Sendai, Japan. And essentially it looks at giving them enough know-how or a blueprint for implementing risk reduction measures. And when I say risk reduction measures, is essentially we are really promoting or encouraging countries to look at prevention and mitigation more than just managing disasters. So there is a need for moving from disaster management to risk management and prevention. And this year's theme, which is inequality, was also taken because there is this increased sort of poverty and inequality, which is not only making people more vulnerable to natural hazards, but it's also making them vulnerable to any shocks. And we have also seen a link between conflict and poverty, conflict and disasters. There is very clear evidence that there is a link between climate change, poverty, vulnerability, and conflict. We work primarily with the governments, but even if they're primarily responsible as per the UN to implement the Sendai framework and disaster risk reduction efforts, it's very clear that government cannot do it alone. So there, the academia, the scientific community has a big role to provide new solutions, new innovations to make these governments or enable these governments to do risk reduction. Similarly, civil society, media, the private sector, all of them together need to really work with the governments to make this happen. There is, in terms of the inequality and poverty, there is a climate projection which was done by one of our organizations, which really shows that if we do not put preventative measures in place, we do not really mitigate the risk, the world may face 560 disasters per year. And this will result in an additional 37.6 million people pushed into poverty by 2030. And a worst case scenario was developed where it can be 100 million population can pushed into poverty, which again, as it means more poverty, more vulnerability, and people's coping capacity to disasters, is less. I just came from Tunis, where we brought together all the African Arab countries, the governments of those countries, the academic and scientific institutions, and private sector together to really frame a sort of a commitment to accelerate the implementation of the Sendai framework. And I must say that I'm really happy to see that there are private sector here, there are academia here. We need to create this interface with government so that the academia, academic and scientific work which is being done really results in policies of governments being implemented, because there is a huge gap we see when it comes to private sector, academia really supporting governments in implementation of the framework. We are struggling with that interface. And this is where we're really looking for more and more partnership with academic institutions, with private sector, to bring that solution into the government policy making, and not just policy making, implementation of those policies. And here, I think I looked at the agenda. It's really a very well planned agenda, which deals with issues of data, issues of seismic, coastal risk reduction. It looks at partnership and so on. So I hope that in today's discussion, we will be able to bring or forge more partnership of academia, private sector, and at the end, we should be able to help the governments, both at local and national level, to really enable them to do more risk reduction. So with that, I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sujit. Before we go any further, I want to thank Eric Bianchi, the man sitting behind the controls here, for all the tech, because we're doing this in the Zoom world, and thank you so much for making this smooth for us. Next up, I want to introduce LeRoy Westerling, who is the chair of the UC Disaster Resilience Network. He, as some of you know, is a professor and chair of the Management of Complex Systems and Director of Management for Innovation, Sustainability, and Technology Programs at UC Merced School of Engineering. He is also affiliated with the Sierra Nevada Research Institute, which, as a former National Park Ranger in Yosemite, I'm very happy about. He has coordinated development of all long-term fire protection scenarios for all 5 California state climate assessments, including the current assessment. So it's hard to find someone who knows that work better. And he serves as the climate working group for NOAA's Science Advisory Board. So he holds a PhD from UC San Diego, BA from UCLA, and he is here to share with us a little bit. So let's give a big warm welcome to LeRoy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate your participation today. You have to bear with me because I only found out 24 hours ago that I was filling in not just my own presentation, but Janet's, Napolitano's as well. So I'm ready. We're good. All right. So it's an interesting point. where we are at today. This is 2023, and after more than a century of exponential growth in global population and in global per capita consumption, these things are greater than ever, as are the scientific, industrial, and agricultural capacities that support them. And yet, in August this year, Michael Clare published an article in The Nation saying, "We are living through early stages of civilizational collapse. This is what it looks like, with global elites that are largely not rising to the challenge and adapting their behavior any better than the Mayan leaders did 1,200 years ago." I think both are true. But how can that be? How can both be true at the same time? There's a useful concept from the study of financial markets behavior that we could think about here in this context. And I'll just give you a plug that, despite my work on wildfire, my PhDs were in things like economics, finance, and political science, so I'm all over the place. And this concept from financial markets is that stability fosters instability. Right? The longer a period of growth and stability, the more risks people take on. And that leaves institutions like banks, corporations, or households more vulnerable to shocks. Right? They have less reserve capacity to deal with exogenous shocks. So a period of stability leads to greater risk. Think about that. Success breeds failure. So you can simultaneously be at the peak of your capacities, the peak of your success, and setting the seeds for your failure in the future, in the near future. A century of exponential growth leaves us consuming closer to the margins with increasingly brittle institutions. And we've seen a lot of examples of that in recent years. Our global interconnectedness makes us resilient to local shocks below a certain threshold in frequency and severity. But shocks that reverse that interconnection also make us much less resilient. Just look at the impact the war in Ukraine is having on global food supply right now. So increasingly severe climate-fueled disasters like wildfires, floods, droughts, hurricanes reveal our cumulative vulnerability, just like financial markets shocks do with banking institutions. As Dr. Mohanty said a moment ago, it's a vulnerability that we have built into a system over a century of exponential growth with the siting and design of our homes and infrastructure and our management or mismanagement of the landscape around them. Katrina, Paradise, Lahaina, just to name some American examples, or the recent floods in Pakistan and Chile, the vast fires in Canada this year. These are not one-offs. They're not isolated, unlucky events after which systems will recover and go on as before. They're signposts to our ever more likely future on the course we're setting for ourselves. The author in The Nation said elites are failing to adapt. But this isn't equally true everywhere, is it? California is an example of a polity beginning to grapple with the hard decisions on building resilience by investing in climate change mitigation and adaptation capacity, as well as in the climate assessments to provide metrics of the risk. Cynics will say, and have said, that we're too small a fraction of global population and consumption to solve it alone. But we're not alone, as you can see from our partners here today and just looking at efforts around the world that are reported regularly in the newspapers. It's easy but inaccurate to disregard the potential power of moral leadership that illuminates pathways to success. Among the assets that California can leverage are its intellectual capacities, the fruits of its sustained and comprehensive investments in public education and research universities and the industries that they have spawned, that enable it to step to the forefront in assessing climate risks and building solutions for adaptation and mitigation, solutions that build our resilience to coming shocks. The UC Disaster Resilience Network is not a state-sponsored entity with a big budget. It's a UC faculty-led initiative of volunteers working to bring together university researchers, student fellows, and community, private sector, and public agency partners to focus on creative solutions that build resilience, making our institutions less brittle and better able to weather the increasing shocks that come from climate change, interacting with the legacies of our built-in vulnerabilities. Today, you'll hear about the cutting-edge research from the many scientists on our panels today, about budding partnerships with universities abroad. Chile, France, Brazil, and India come to mind, with leadership there from Nico Pascal, Chip Schooley, and Joe Lightman, who you meet today. About campus and community co-created science for resilience, in contributions today from Rich Applebaum, Chris Chase Dunn, and others. About student fellows programs, so Jack and Sonnet are here today, two of our fellows, and Katja Amistad and George Rutherford are participating and have helped foster that program. You'll be hearing from our sponsor, Ernst & Young, about our collaboration on their data science challenge for disaster resilience. And there have been work on developing and delivering online curriculum on disasters, and David Oglesby will be addressing that later today as well. In the vision of our founders and early recruits, some of whom are here today, like Nico Pascal, Rich Applebaum, Joe Lightman, these are all ways that the University of California and its partners can come together to marshal and enhance the vast scientific capacities of the state of California, scientific and societal capacities that the state of California can bring to bear to build resilience to disasters of the near future, and to map out pathways to success that we can export and share with our colleagues around the world. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, LeRoy. Okay, next up we have Dr. Saharnaz Mirzazad of Cal OPR. She's the Chief Deputy Director of Climate and Planning in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. She was the Deputy Director of Community Investment and Planning at the California Strategic Growth Council, overseeing more than $3 billion of investment in infrastructure and programs, and has worked with local and regional governments to pilot all manner of new initiatives for bringing rigid climate and equity goals, including the Transformative Climate Communities program. So please welcome her. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me a doctor title. I'm not a doctor, so. But I appreciate that. Thank you, thank you. My name is Saharnaz Mirzazad. I'm Chief Deputy Director at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. I want to thank you, the UC system, for this forward-looking initiative. I'm really impressed by its vision and what's trying to accomplish. We have a world-class research institutes in California, and we will be really not taking advantage of this system if these type of initiatives and voluntary initiatives wouldn't have been in place. Disaster resilience and all of that, you know, is forefront of our mind in so many ways. And I would like to emphasize that you will hear throughout the day that the disasters, intensity and frequencies are increasing. So we are dealing with a disaster after disaster in very in an unbelievable way that we can't underscore how much of effort and resources are going to manage these disasters. One of the big takeaways that I want you to have from today is that California putting a lot of resources to ensure that California is ready for the future that is changing under our climate challenges. At the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, we are having 4 focuses on making sure that we are building more resilient Californias. One of the things is that our past approach to disaster management is not responsive anymore. We have to take a systematic approach to the way we are approaching the disaster and how we can systematically look into areas that we can improve to help communities be more resilient. At the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, we do a lot of guidelines. We create them. We try to look into different guidelines on how these guidelines could help communities to think about like what could make their communities more resilient. What are the ingredients of being resilient, not only built environment, but in the social infrastructure as well. We have our general plan guidelines that we are taking another look into that, see like, are there things in the general plan guidelines that communities can consider to ensure the resilience of the communities in long term. And by the way, there is a request for information for updates of the new general plan guidelines. We really appreciate the participation from the research institutes to look into it, see if there are things that you would think that we should include in the next version of the general plan guidelines. We also want to make sure that we have the access to the most recent data and projections that could support the communities in getting prepared for future impacts of climate change. As you heard, we are undergoing the new Research 50 Climate Assessment, which is the new scale of the assessment for California, like built on the national assessment. OPR is leading that effort, and many of the researchers in this room are part of that ongoing effort. We also want to make sure that those data and research is accessible for the community. So we are building tools that the communities can use, like CalAdapt tool, that will showcase the outcome of those data for the communities so they can have a better sense of what's ahead of us in the near future. The other area that we are focusing on is that communities across California are not experiencing the impact of disaster in the same way. We have communities that are really vulnerable to this impact in different ways because of their social fabric, because of their location, and different other factors that are contributing to their vulnerabilities. We want to make sure that in our office, we are building capacity in these communities to be more responsive to this type of disasters. We have multiple ways to approach that. We provide technical assistance. We try to have our grants more tailored to these communities to help build some of those social and hard infrastructure in the communities, and also ensuring that we identify those communities that are vulnerable. One of the outcomes of the Paradise disaster was that we realized that this community wasn't showing up in any of our maps from the vulnerability perspective. We are building a new platform called Vulnerable Population Platform that is looking to consider what are the different vulnerabilities that we need to consider in assessing the communities and making sure that they are aware of the potential risks that is ahead of them in future, and they're getting prepared for that. It was a really hard lessons learned, but we are getting prepared for next disasters that are ahead of us. And the other part of what we do and what we focus on is ensuring that our grants, we have like a very limited money. If you look into the basically the landscape of what we are seeing from the impact of disaster, the amount of fund that is available to help and support communities are limited. We need to be very careful and very cautious and wise on how we are spending those dollars. One of the efforts that we are doing in our end to ensure that we are aligning what we are offering on the state side to take advantage of the federal dollars. One of them is how we can align our funding for the communities to be able to access hazard mitigation funding in the federal level. We have been looking into that from different perspectives, and one of our first grant climate adaptation planning program is one of the first that has funded communities to be able to look into that. So we are trying to make sure that we are more connected in funding side, and we are more alignment to be able to help communities to access funding. So this is like a very cohesive approach that we are trying to help communities to be more resilient to disasters, and especially climate disasters. The final thing that I would love to leave you with is that we all of us are great at our silos of excellence. This is not the response anymore. We have to work together, we have to collaborate together, and use the resources and intelligence and knowledge that we have. One of the ways that we have been trying to accomplish that is through our Integrated Climate Adaptation and Planning Technical Advisory Council. We have multiple members from different institutions, like sectors that are part of that Technical Advisory Council to help us chart the future. What is ahead of us, what we can do better, how we can collaborate better. But that's only the first step. we need more of those type of collaboration to make sure that we are working together in a better and more collaborative way. And we are looking to the UC system too. This is a huge opportunity for us, and everyone across the globe wants to be part of this system. And we, the California Governor Office, we would love to make sure that we're taking advantage of what we have in California. Help us to build more resilience California in future, and let us know how we can help you. So with that, thank you so much for inviting me, and appreciate being here. Looking forward to learn more from you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, our fourth keynote this morning, and just to be clear that we did not forget the private sector, core piece of this puzzle. Rodrigo Madanes is with us today from Ernst & Young. He is the Global Innovation AI Leader there, now often known as EY. For those of you unfamiliar, it's one of the largest professional service organizations in the world, with over 400,000 people serving clients in more than 150 countries. Rodrigo is responsible for guiding EY's global AI innovation strategy. And don't be fooled, he has some extreme technical expertise behind this work as well, as is evidenced by the fact that he's been granted 3 patents and is for having created novel AI products at both the MIT Media Lab and Apple's Advanced Technologies Group. So please welcome Rodrigo to the microphone.
Very kind words, thank you. So I've been trying to figure out what to communicate to you guys, what to talk about to make it useful for you. So I'll talk about technology, but also talk about EY and the private-public partnership that's developed over the years. So I think there's like 3 parts to my talk. There's my background and EY and the role it plays. Second, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about historically, how does these professional private sector and big 4 professional services firms have partner in disaster response scenarios. And then I'll tell you a bit about AI and a bit of the future that's coming at us very quickly. I'm sure you've all read the press and know about what's happening in generative AI, but I think there's a lot of value we can get, and if we infuse Gen AI in the toolings we use that our consumers use, if you will, in disaster scenarios. So that's broadly the structure. So a little bit about me. There's a funny thing that I told Nico when he invited me to talk, is that I actually did my PhD at Berkeley. So I spent 8 years in the UC campus, very warm years, very happy to be here. It's quite an honor. Never thought I would be here after doing that PhD, but here I am back again. As a case study, if you will, about the way private and public work comes together, I spent, early in my career, I joined a very small company called Skype. When we were about 50, 60 people. We didn't think at the time, this was 2005, that it would have a broad impact in the world. We were excited about this new technology. We thought, well, who knows, maybe somebody will use it in novel ways. And sure enough, what ended up happening after the first 2 or 3 years, so I was leading the product design for the company at the time, and I was surprised after a couple of years how many uses came up. Like, here's a private company trying to do some interesting technology, and the scenarios were like, telephony networks will fall down, and they're like, oh, but I still had Skype to talk to this, to be able to communicate in situations that were really abysmal. So it was like, I was very surprised at how technology can be very useful in situations that it wasn't designed for. They're just generic tools. So EY, Ernst & Young is one of the big 4 professional services firms. We're about 400,000 people. We have 80,000 technologies, so there's a lot of technology work. The interesting thing I wanted to share with you is we do a lot of pro bono work too. So we have a program called Ripples to contribute to the community. We've had about 100,000 EY people who have donated their hours in the last year. We've contributed, I think, about 100 million in the last year to contribute to the communities. Our people have donated about 1 million hours in the last year. This is globally. So we try to, you tend to think public-private, but we try to contribute and be part of the overall community efforts. With regards to disaster resilience, I think one of the, so I'm a long-term technologist, so I've only been in consulting the last 4 or 5 years. But one of the things that surprised me was the COVID experience, the pandemic, that when it happened, there was a lot of contribution from these professional services firms to pandemic response in terms of government asking these firms to stand up very quickly, either call centers or operational centers to distribute vaccines, to process unemployment forms. We were all scrambling to help, and there was a lot of demand from governments across the world to say, could you do this? We need it done within 2 weeks. And we would stand up, here's 300 people, they can do it, this is how it works. So I think there has historically been a big partnership. I asked one of my team members to tell me what exactly we did. And we set up a number of chatbots in different countries to address concerns because people weren't able to access the websites. The websites kept falling down. We did a lot of processing of welfare programs and unemployment claims. Many of those came by hand, so they weren't automatically going to servers, so we needed to put hundreds of people to look through these by hand, process them so people could get the money into their bank accounts. A lot of the vaccine distribution was very needed some careful assessment because in the early days, the supply-demand imbalance wasn't working, meaning a lot of vaccines would go to a place where, because they would expire quickly, we weren't able, there was a mismatch, and where they were really needed, there weren't enough. So there was a lot of work we did there. So we did some good work. So we try to partner well with governments. Conscious of time, let me first tell you a little bit about generative AI, which I don't know how many people, I'll ask, how many people have tried ChatGPT? Okay, so you all sort of know generative AI. Okay, I'm impressed. So how many, I know those hands will go down a bit if I ask this question. Generative AI is not just ChatGPT. You're going to see a lot of changes coming in the next 2 years with respect to what these technologies can do. And part of my motivation for coming to talk here is to try to inspire some of this community to start putting together the tools that basically the building blocks are there, but they probably need to be reconfigured for the use cases that you have. So let me explain a little bit more, because I think the academic community can help in creating some of these open source tools that can be used globally. One of the new things that is coming in the next generation of models in the next year, or almost present in some places, what's called multimodal models. What this means is multimodal means multiple modes. So it's not just text, it's also images or videos, and they all come together. And a good example of that I've seen already is you can take a picture of your bike and you say, I need to lower my seat, what do I do? And what you'll get back is the screw at the top that you see, you need to unplug that and push it down. And you might go, which of the screw, the red one or the black one? The red one, the one that is near the top, near the seat. And you go, you unscrew it, and sure enough, it works. Because it's able to understand the image with the text of how you lower seats from bikes and give you those instructions. So if you fast forward, I imagine many of you can already imagine the implications if you have gas lines, if you have water pipe issues, if you need to both prepare or respond to these issues, being able to take pictures of what's happening around your home and being able to get reasonably good instructions on what to do in those cases can really help support people, as opposed to them having to do searches and calling and I don't know what you mean on the phone. So we're probably going to see a lot of assistance come and help people in many different scenarios. It's just that the tools aren't there. So it requires a lot of crafting these into, retooling these tools into more disaster websites or where you can just click on things and they'll wire it up to these tools. So there's some work to be done there, but I think the AI community has built some very useful technologies that can be repackaged for the use cases of supporting millions of people. Just like when I was at Skype, which I didn't realize it could help people, and it ended up helping a lot of people. To close, I don't want to take too much time here. We sponsor at EY what's called an Open Data Science Challenge. We do this every year. We have tens of thousands of students participating. We've been doing it for 4 years. Basically what it is we grab a bunch of data that's open so anybody can download it and use it. And it's typically to solve some thematic problem. This year, or the 2024 year, is going to be around coastal resilience. So then we challenge students mostly to figure out, given this data and this problem, how will you design better coastal resilience? We award prizes. I think the prizes are $10,000, $5,000, $2,000 for the top 3. They get to fly also, I think, somewhere in the world. I think it's Greece. It's Greece this 2024 for some conference to participate and showcase their work. So if anybody has any questions, contact me. I'll put you in touch, but it should all be on the EY Open Data Science Challenge. Connect with me. I'm happy to contribute. You know, I'm available on LinkedIn for whatever you need. I'm available. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rodrigo. All right, I'm going to invite our 4 panelists, well, presenters, now to become a panelist. Did you know that was coming? Yeah, I think you knew that was coming. All right. We're going to ask them to come up here. We do have some time for a bit of a conversation, so we're going to do that. We have, if you check the agenda, we have about till 10:15, and then we'll make sure everyone gets a break before the next panel discussion.
We're missing Saharnaz. Saharnaz.
Oh yeah, did Saharnaz have to go?
We have a substitute.
Oh, welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks.
I'll do my best.
Can you briefly introduce yourself too?
I'm going to give you the mic to introduce yourself to start off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Edwards, and I also work for the Governor's Office of Planning and Research on Saharnaz's team. So happy to be here. She had to step out for another event, so I'll do my best.
All right. Well, thank you, Abby. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
So what I've done, I want to keep this high level this morning. I was really just drawing some high level questions and some themes from what you've already addressed this morning. And obviously later in the day, we're going to have the opportunity to talk more about the details of the various research ongoing. But each of you mentioned the sort of the intersections of the various sectors that we're talking about today. And I'm just going to jump right to it and ask each of you to give me a quick assessment, and you will not get in trouble for this. This is my promise to you. I can't promise that, actually. No. But what does each sector, just name a couple of the sectors that you had experience working together. Well, we're talking private sector, for-profit, nonprofit, governmental sectors at different levels, obviously education and research. What does each do best, and if you dare, worst? What are the things you've seen different sector partners do really well, and what are the things that make you pause or wonder, gosh, how do we work together? So I'm gonna toss that out. I'm gonna look for volunteers before I start picking on people. Maybe give it 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, Sujit, you were sitting closest to me, so I'm going to start with you in that case. Just any comments on what you've seen particular sectoral players do really well and or not so?
Thanks for that. I think, you know, when it comes to working together, the word silos we always hear in our work is there in all sectors, in all, I think, spaces. But if I look at the way sometime, you know, I'll take the first example of government, because we predominantly work as UN with the member states, with the governments. I think there is a lot of synergy we see in different departments, we deal with Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Disaster Management in some cases. They are sort of compelled to work with other departments because they know that they can't do it themselves, and they have to collaborate with other departments. But I also see that when it comes to government really interfacing with the civil society or the private sector, there we see the biggest gap in terms of the connection. And we also see that the academic and scientific community, they have a great deal of knowledge and expertise to offer. But when it comes to the nexus between the government and the academic, that's also a weak link, which we always feel in majority of countries, whether it's developed or developing or least developed countries. And that is something, and we felt that there is no option, but we have to work really with the academic and scientific institutions and governments to really create that interface. We have been working with governments on that, but sometimes we also see that the amount of knowledge or the research outcomes which comes from academic scientific institutions is not really flowing to the government decision making. And I have a lot of examples on that, but I will stop there. And I think this is a crucial thing we have been really looking at, that how do we create more such interfaces at different levels, not just national, but you have regional organizations, regional governance mechanisms, intergovernmental organizations. We need to bring those elements together, because sometimes we see the cutting edge innovation solutions, which can be very much used in risk reduction, is not really used by governments. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the global perspective. It might make some of us feel better that it's not just here. LeRoy, that was a volunteer hand. All right.
Yeah. So I work. I'm a university professor. I work a lot with state and federal agencies, with communities, with NGOs, only occasionally with private sector, but also sometimes private sector. And I would say it's not so much that one does it better than the others, is that getting the knowledge base from research translated into useful products and formats that can actually make a difference in a community practice or an agency practice or a corporate practice takes a specific kind of entrepreneurship. And somebody thinking outside the box, willing to sort of thinking about problems that are not their usual problems and try to understand how the knowledge that they are familiar with could be applied to it, and sort of telling people what they can have rather than just force feeding them a product that doesn't work for them, or on the flip side, an agency or a corporation saying, I want to know how many lightning strikes are going to be in July 2054 in this location. We can't answer that question, right? But there are a lot of useful things we can tell you, and here's how it would work. So I think building capacity for that kind of entrepreneurship takes a particular type of education, takes a certain amount of risk taking, and when there's not a lot of profits available, that kind of entrepreneurship works great in a sector where you can make a lot of money off of it, right? But in a lot of this, that's not always obvious how that could be monetized. So it takes a certain support structure to produce that.
Okay. Thank you, LeRoy. All right, I'll offer for other answers, but I'm not going to make everybody answer every question. So,
I mean, I can talk briefly.
Okay, thank you, and then Abby too. Yeah.
So, LeRoy, I understand that there are sort of situations where the market breaks down, if you will, if there's no profits. Like, how do you create incentive structures, and that you need to, solve that, because we need that type of work to happen for our civilization. I think that the most interesting point for me right now, being so closely connected to AI, more than representing private in general, is the velocity at which AI tools are being developed. And it feels like we need the sort of public sector to come closer, because the technology is moving very fast, and it's not easy to slow it down. And it is incredibly impactful to so many ways we carry out our lives, whether it's work, in academia, it's already hit like a ton of bricks, where students can just say, write me an essay on this, and what do we do? What are our policies? How do we do that? So this is going to be happening across our way of life. And so I would encourage closer collaboration to manage how we integrate AI into our way of life.
Thanks. Yeah, Abby.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. I think, you really touched on the weakness of government, which is that we move really slowly. And so I think that there's a lot of space for, in the academic sector, in the private sector, others to move quickly and inform policy. And we can help move the policy forward, but without the kind of close collaboration, we kind of end up being on different pages. I see a lot of close collaboration through the 5th Climate Change Assessment and the academic institutions, trying to get at the best available science to help inform policy and decision making. But without, projects like that and funding for that to help inform, we lose, there's a lot of space between. And so definitely a lot of opportunities, but I think I've noticed working in government how slow it moves. And as we're mentioning, things are moving really quickly. And so how can we be forward looking, make decisions now to, look into the future and help us? So, yeah.
Thank you. All right, so we all clearly, everybody here agrees that collaborate, we all speak to it. Collaboration is the key. We need to work more together. How do we build those partnerships? Can we comment? I know as humans, we like to think that we can dispassionately look back at any map of any community and say, oh, well, clearly these are the right partners. But when it comes to that moment where action is needed, so often it's based on who do you know? Who do you already have a relationship with? Is there someone you can just pick up the phone and call, or Skype? And so can you speak to that and sort of examples of where that how important that trust, that pre-existing relationship or trust is in moving quickly in the case of having to respond for a disaster or just in general? And even just examples of where some pre-existing networks or communications helped.
I think I could start, I guess.
Yeah.
I think exactly to your point, we've noticed that with those pre-existing relationships, a lot of people are left out of the conversation and left out of the response. And so something that we're thinking a lot about is through the programs that we create, how can we reach people that we aren't reaching to bring them into the network, bring them into the, help them, participate in the planning process for the city, help them kind of get on board and understanding what services are available. Because I think we notice that when disaster strikes, folks that are most vulnerable and don't have access to the resources often have been left out of the conversation at the forefront. And so we're spending a lot of time at the state trying to think about, okay, who are we not reaching and who is not in the network? And so while it's true that the pre-existing relationships are really important, I think we're trying to think about who are we missing a lot, and trying to think about how we can craft programs to meet those folks. So,
Excellent. Yeah, Sujit.
On this, I think this is really important, issue, which is trust and pre-existing relations within any network is really extremely important. But as my colleague said, you also lose out on many other actors in that. I think this is also true that engagement of any sort of new stakeholder or partners is not comes natural. Sometimes you have to think about incentives. And I'll give example of private sector engagement. When we started with a big alliance of private sector for disaster risk reduction, of course there are many different kinds of network, private sector partnership and so on are there. But when it comes to disaster risk reduction, private sector did not see a business model for themselves. They did not see the incentive to engage. In the initial days when I was engaging with private sector, they always used to say, yes, we have corporate social responsibility. We are doing a lot on in response, in relief, and so on. But when it comes to reducing risk, they saw it as an external thing from them, but it was really made evident that it's not about just helping others, it's helping yourself. It's helping as the private sector, your investments are also at risk if you do not take enough preventative measures. And that perhaps is one of the incentive, but still I think there is something lacking that really makes a kind of business case for private sector. It's still seen as a philanthropic engagement, whether it's with the UN or with the public sector. There is no clear sense of how do we really make business out of it. In some cases there we have seen private sector really make good use of these mitigation prevention approaches and makes business out of it, which is still not sort of ingrained or I would say mainstreamed in any private sector like business cases.
Thank you, Sujit. Yeah, LeRoy.
So there's sort of a structural problem that often prevents university faculty, scientists, from being fully engaged in these networks. And it's how our work is funded. You think of us as like public servants, but we're actually cost centers in the university, right? And we raise money to pay a big chunk of our own salary, our students, all our students, all my staff, right? So I have a business basically housed within the university that raises hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to fund all these activities. And it's generally linked to grants from public agencies that are for specific initiative or project, and they're temporary. So you get this money, you swoop into a community, you kind of take advantage of people by, incorporating them for your short-term project, and then you leave. And you move on to the next one with the next grant. And so there's not that continuity that builds trust. You're not there as a partner day in and day out, right? So I really benefited in my early career from getting engaged with this program funded by NOAA, the RISA program out of the Climate Program Office. So I was funded continuously for 20 years by them. Not a lot of money, but as a PI in the Climate Research Division at Scripps, they have a NOAA-funded program there for engagement about climate services across California. And so we had this additional capacity for staffing and for organizing across the UC system for engagement with stakeholders around California on climate change. And that kept us there as a long-term partner. So they helped build those networks and relationships. So when there's a flood, when there's a fire season, when there's a drought, right? We're part of the conversation. And it's because of that long-term sort of base, sustained support to promote that kind of engagement that we could do that. And I think that's a really key component that often gets lost in how we fund science in the U.S. So.
Right. I appreciate that. So several of you now mentioned the role of dollars, money in general. Of course, money is a tool, can be used for good or ill. But whether it's monetization of a particular technology, whether it's the grant process and the philanthropic norms of a particular country or region, how does this play out when we're talking? I mean, you mentioned, Sujit, in your initial presentation about how poverty is linked directly with the severity of the toll of any given natural risk and how it becomes a disaster. How does it play out in the organizational sense? When we think about who has the money in the community, whether it be the private sector, public sector, or the nonprofits, that might have great knowledge, but not a lot of resources. And so then they may get overlooked as a potential partner. How do we navigate that landscape when dollars are not well or evenly distributed among potential supports or players?
If I may, I think in my experience, resources are never enough in any context, actually. In whether it's a developed country, a least developed country, or any institution, for all our aspirations to be dealt with, I think resources are never enough. So I think what is really important to look at is the cost benefit of investing in any resilience and risk reduction. We have seen, and I have spoken to many colleagues. It's evident that when it comes to spending or putting resources for response, relief, after disaster, that becomes top priority for governments, and they put the resources. But when it comes to, let's say, building quality and sustainable infrastructure which can withstand an earthquake, there the question comes that we don't have enough resources to make these additional elements to make them stronger, and who knows, in 50 years, 100 years, there's an earthquake, whether it will be used or not. So there is all these questions which limits the understanding of cost benefit of investing in risk reduction, and that makes it also challenging to put adequate resources in preventative activities, because when something is prevented, you don't see what actually happened or what is the impact of it. So that's a dilemma we are all dealing with, that when it comes to investing in relief response, of course that's needed, but at the same time, if that could have been avoided in the first place, the benefit of those additional costs are sometimes not seen. And I think that's really a critical element we have to keep on discussing in all the spaces.
Thank you, Sujit.
I just want to highlight the time.
Yeah, we're almost to time, but there's some burning additional. Absolutely, Abby, if you want to.
It's so burning, I just have to say. Well, I'll be quick. Under OPR, we have a new office. It's called the Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications. It's a mouthful. But they got funding through COVID to fund community-based organizations, and they fund what they're calling a trusted messenger network, to really kind of, to his point earlier, to just fund staffing. To just fund ongoing staff support for community-based organizations that are really these trusted messengers within the communities. So who folks are looking to. So it's faith-based organizations, it's different coalitions throughout, and they have had funding through COVID and now through extreme heat and different initiatives to kind of be that place in the community that folks go. And really the thought is just to fund staff time. So new models of funding, I think, is helpful in that regard.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Well, we're going to have a lot more time, right, to hear from folks along the way. So I want to please give a hand here to Sujit and Abby and LeRoy and Rodrigo. Thank you very much. We're off to a good start. We have about 15 minutes. Right? We're going to get back together at 10:30, so technically 13 and a half minutes, but we're going to work with you.